Good afternoon, everyone. I have 2:30, so I will go ahead and get us started. So thanks to everyone for joining us for today's webinar, Collaborative Approaches to Cybersecurity and Incident Response Planning. Today's webinar is the first in a spring series of webinars that NASS is hosting. There will be 3 total, so we encourage you to join us for all of them. I'd like to begin with a reminder that this is an open session. Registration was open and members of the media are present in the audience. This session will be recorded and posted to the NASS website. I'd like to ask everyone on to please make sure you stay on mute when you're not speaking. We have quite a few folks on this webinar and more joining, so it's really important that everyone stays on mute. We will pause after each presentation and panel for questions. If you have questions as the presentations are going on, please feel free to type those in the chat and I will ask them at the end during the Q&A session. Or if you would like to ask questions yourself, feel free to use the raise hand feature or just send me a message in the chat and I will call on you to unmute yourself at the end of each presentation. I would also like to begin today by thanking the Democracy Fund for sponsoring today's session in our full spring webinar series. It is because of their support that we were able to open up registration at no cost, so we really appreciate it. And we're glad to see that so many folks have joined and are still joining. I would also just like to thank you all for joining today and particularly thank our presenters and panelists. We have a really great lineup. We're going to start with a presentation from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, overviewing a lot of the resources that they have available that relate to incident response planning and exercising. And then we're going to get into 3 state panels to highlight some of the most innovative collaborative state practices that are happening right now around cybersecurity and incident response planning. We'll hear today from Idaho, Colorado, and North Carolina. So without any more hesitation, I want to get right into the presentations. And we are going to start today with a presentation from Ryan Macias, who is our... Ryan, you can go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, NASS, for allowing us to be here today and share with our election community partners some of the incident response services, resources that CISA has to offer, as well as ways to collaborate with others in the elections community and those that you may not perceive as part of the election community, such as your emergency management and law enforcement and so on and so forth. First, my name is Ryan Macias. I am a subject matter expert consultant with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. But prior to this, I have been in election technology and election security for over 15 years at the federal and state level. But without further ado, we'll jump into the presentation. There are 3 main topics that I'm going to go over today, which is incident response planning, incident response reporting, and then incident response training and exercising. And so on the first slide here is around planning and some of the services and resources that CISA has for incident response planning in advance of an incident that may occur. Both of the products that you see on the screen here are part of what CISA calls its Last Mile Initiative. And the Last Mile Initiative is it's a dynamic initiative that responds to the evolving needs of election administrators by providing a diverse set of tools with a specific focus on reaching election administrators in small and mid-sized jurisdictions or jurisdictions that may be under-resourced or may not have the capacity internally to be able to develop specific safeguards, mitigative measures, and or incident response planning tools. And CISA continues to actively collaborate with these stakeholders to customize products and develop new variations and introduce new tools. And the two that you see here are the two that are specifically focused at incident response planning. I'll start with the one on the right-hand side because it is more of a high-level overview, which we call our Election Emergency Response Guide, formerly the Election Day Emergency Response Guide. But after utilizing the term Election Day with, as we all know, particularly in 2020, we no longer have a single day, but an election period. We heard from elections officials that we needed to rename it. And so moving into 2021, it is now the Election Emergency Response Guide. This tool is, it identifies critical incident types that can occur in your jurisdiction. So as I stated, each one of these items is customizable and we work with jurisdictions on it. And so the types of items that we may address are weather, fire, violent incidents, as well as cyber incidents. It's simple, it's concise, it provides a few efficient and effective response steps for an election jurisdiction to take, as well as identifies the contact information of who you would want to contact in specific incidents. Specific use cases that we have talked to elections officials about the Election Emergency Response Guide on is some jurisdictions have used it as a training tool for their internal election staff, as well as their election workers, putting it in poll worker training guides, as well as putting it in voting location materials. So putting it in your poll book binders or the materials that are sent out to the polling locations or voting locations for early voting and election day, so that they would have it on hand to inform the election worker and to inform voters on what one would need to do in the case of an emergency. Another thing that elections officials have stated that they have used this for is for relationship and capacity building. They've taken these to their emergency management, to their law enforcement, and worked with them to find out who is the right contact, as well as to notify those entities that they are listing them as a contact on their emergency or their election day emergency response guide in order to reach out to them in the case of one of these incidents. The second item, which actually became basically a derivative of the Election Emergency Response Guide, as we started to disseminate these and customize them across jurisdictions, we had a few jurisdictions that called us, a state specifically, who reached out and said, you know, this is great. It's a very handy tool, and it works probably for our poll workers, our election workers, and our voters to know what to do in the case of an incident in a voting location. However, what do we do in our office? What do we do in the case of a true emergency, and something that may occur that is going to go beyond just taking those kind of high-level steps? How do we build out a true incident response plan, an incident response guide? So CISA took a look at this and started thinking through it and working with a handful of states and jurisdictions in developing what you can see on the left-hand side, which is the Incident Detection and Notification Guide. It's a basic cyber incident response plan that is able to be used and incorporated into a broader plan. It is not your 400 or 500 page incident response plan that identifies all of the threats, all of the risks, and what to do. It is a set of templates that identify key stakeholders and allows you to think through the types of entities that may need to be in an incident response plan. It is pre-filled with some of those key stakeholders to make you think through. If you're a small jurisdiction and you do not have an IT director, well, who may fill that role? That is a role that probably needs to be in your incident response plan. And so on and so forth. And the templates are there to be, again, customized and filled out and worked with your jurisdiction and your entities, your vendors, and your key stakeholders to get to a spot where you would have an incident communication plan. The other thing that it does is it has incident notification plans, which provide standardized procedures for notifying the appropriate stakeholders of a the potential cyber incident. It provides a set of non-technical indicators to detect potential cyber incidents and to initiate the appropriate notification plans. These indicators are based on observations, so they're non-technical, and they're there to help the users identify widely applicable symptoms of threats to an election processes. So we'll say something like, you know, as we all are aware, around 10 a.m. on election day, all of the voting equipment shuts down and the poll worker notices that the equipment is no longer working. What should they do in that first step? Most likely they should check to see if it's plugged in because, you know, the 2-hour battery backup has just run out or the 3-hour battery backup has just run out. And so first start by plugging it in. Which is going to be significantly different than when you turn on, you know, you walk in on close of registration day and you turn on your computer and your voter registration database has, you know, the signs of ransomware on it or the request for a ransom. And so this document distinguishes criticality levels. So there's low, medium, and high, because the entities that you are going to contact and the people that you are going to speak with on a low incident, it may just be simple tech steps of try plugging it in, try rebooting, versus on something like a ransomware attack where you may need to contact external agencies, you may need to report it up to the federal government, you may need to get your communications personnel lined up to be able to identify this to the media and so on and so forth. And so it distinguishes different criticality levels and different incident notification and escalation paths for the different severities. And that's really the two main guides that we have developed so far. Like I said, one is a very high level and the other one is more in depth on getting yourself to a full incident response plan. So if we can move on to the next slide, I'll talk here about reporting. And just really quickly here, CISA has their threat and their hunt and incident response team, or HIRT, H-I-R-T, that provides the threat hunting services. And the main thing I'm going to say here about HIRT is CISA's HIRT cannot come out and assist you and help you with incident response planning if they are unaware that you are having an incident. And so make sure that if and when an incident occurs in your jurisdiction that you report it. Contact CISA, contact EIISAC, contact FBI, contact the entities that are necessary and those entities that are in your election emergency response guide or your incident response plan, and get that information up to CISA so that CISA can determine what mitigative measures that they can do and how they can come out and assist you in getting your systems back up and running, and particularly in these critical timeframes. And so you can see here, there's the phone number and the email address of how to get in contact with CISA. This will be distributed and disseminated. And one thing that I will say that I failed to mention on the last slide in the incident response plan templates is identify these types of entities, the federal government entities that you know you are going to want to get in contact, your regional staff and regional directors, your cybersecurity advisors, your physical protective security advisors from CISA, your regional FBI folks. Identify those at a state level and input them into your incident response template so that when you start to work with your local jurisdictions and filling out the information for your local emergency management, your local law enforcement, and so on and so forth, those items are already identified and just make it easier upon those small and mid-sized jurisdictions who may not know who those entities are either at the state level or at the federal level. And so input HIRT and CISA as one of those entities. And then the last thing that I want to talk about here is exercising. And just quickly highlight two of the exercises that CISA puts on. Tabletop the Vote. This is an annual event. The Tabletop the Vote 2021 will be coming up this summer in either July or August. A date has yet to be set, but it will be coming up this summer. And this is a way for you to understand what the roles and responsibilities are of each level of organization in the election community, from locals to state to federal, to all of the different federal partners. Each year we have entities from all across the federal government and across state, local, territorial, tribal governments, and work through specific scenarios. And one of the things that I can say is it's one thing to fill out an incident response plan. It's another thing to know who to contact and be ready to contact them. But in the case of a situation in an incident when you are under distress, it is very hard to remember to go to it and or to follow the steps and processes as laid out unless you have exercised it. So bring your incident response plan with you. Bring the entities that are listed on your incident response plan to the tabletop the vote. Have them engaged, have them participate so that they understand what their roles may be and who they may need to contact. The last thing I'll talk about here is election cyber tabletop in a box, or the election cyber tabletop exercise package. And what this is you can see here on the right-hand side, there's a manual or a guide of how to conduct a tabletop exercise within your jurisdiction. And again, it's a way to get your incident response plans in front of you to identify if you have the criticality levels correct, whether or not you have the right entities on in your incident response and communications plan, and to make sure that those people are aware that they are on your incident response plan. I can tell you a situation that I was in years ago when I got a call at 3 o'clock in the morning and was woken up, and I answered the phone and said, "Hey, Ryan, we're having this incident." And I said, "Thanks. Why are you calling me, and how am I going to help you on this?" And they said, "Well, you're our voting systems expert, and this has to do with a voting systems incident. We don't know what to do." And so we had you listed as the person at the state when I was with the state of California. We have you as the person to call. And I was unaware that I was even in this jurisdiction's incident response plan. I had no authority to go in and do anything on it, and I had never planned out with them what we would do in such situation. And so making sure that everybody is aware of what their roles and responsibilities are is a way to ensure that if and when an incident occurs, that everyone knows what to do and how to do it. And utilizing CISA's tabletop in a box is a way to test it inside of your local jurisdiction. In addition to the tabletop in a box, CISA also will do statewide and regional exercises that are geared for you and your state and for all of your local jurisdictions and so on and so forth. But the tabletop in a box is an easy way for you to plan, exercise, train, all the way down to your specific agency and or within your specific staff at a local level and or at a state level. With that, we'll continue to the next slide. Here is just a list of where you can find specific resources. The Incident Detection and Notification Guide and all of its templates are up on the CISA website. And same thing with the Cyber Tabletop in a Box can be located on the CISA website, so you can download that and use it. Or you can contact us at, forward to the next slide. Here's my information, here's CISA's information. And we can work with you, particularly on those last mile concepts, the EERG and or the Incident Detection and Notification Guide. And we will workshop with you and your state and your local jurisdictions to get it into a place where you feel comfortable, as well as we will work with you to ensure that you get the necessary exercises and training to work through each of those incident response plans. And with that, I just want to say once again, thank you to NASS for allowing us to be here today. And if there are any questions, I will take those now. And otherwise, I will sit around and listen to the rest of the people give their presentations on incident response planning. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Ryan. And I'll give it just a second to see if we have any questions come into the chat or hands raised. And we will also get those links into the chat for you all to just be able to click on them or copy and paste them. I'm very happy to see these resources have come through and are ready to use now. We've been working on some of them for some time, and I know that some of them came out, just before 2020 or during 2020. So folks probably haven't gotten the chance to utilize them yet. So I really appreciate you coming on and reminding everybody that they're out there and making sure that they use them. I don't see any questions, so thanks, Ryan, and we will go ahead and move on to the next panel.
Thank you.
At this time, I would like to introduce Mr. Chad Houck. He is the Chief Deputy for the Idaho Secretary of State's office. Chad will be leading a panel with some folks from his office and others in state government in Idaho to talk about some of the initiatives they've been working on around cybersecurity and incident response planning. And I will let Chad introduce his other panelists. Go ahead, Chad.
Thank you, Lindsay. As Lindsay mentioned, Chad Houck, Chief Deputy Secretary of State for Idaho. With me today, I have Director Brad Ritchie from the Idaho Office of Emergency Management, as well as Amit Jian, Professor and Dean at the Boise State University in Boise, Idaho, with the Department of Computer Science, as well as our Director of IT and Head of Cybersecurity for the Office of the Secretary of State. To just give a quick background on what we'll be talking about today, some of the things that you see here may be familiar with those of you who've done some different exercises in the IT and preparation space with the Belfer Center from Harvard. What we're talking about is Idaho's Edison project. And this actually started, it was a brainchild of an Army officer that had some experience in Joint Special Operations Command. Major Caitlin Conley with the Harvard Kennedy School Belfer Center, and specifically coming out of a exercise that they did out at the Belfer Center known as Battle Staff Boot Camp. And if you were involved in that, it was really a question about how do we take these military operational tactics and see if they work in the election space. It became this dashboard. This is a screenshot from the Battle Staff Boot Camp playbook. If you have a copy of that, if not, it's available at the Harvard Kennedy School. But it asks, can we gather intel in such a way and communicate it in such a way that situational awareness is enhanced across the operational environment? And when we really kind of started to break that down from an election standpoint and coming back from that event, the tool that we used for the exercise was phenomenal, but it was a tool that was developed for an exercise. And we started looking at, can we actually put it into a real world use? To get to that point, we went to the Office of Emergency Management, knowing that they have both emergency management and a very good crossover, at least in Idaho, with our military division, so that they would be familiar with the tactical approach. And as I said, we wanted to look at, can we get intelligence on all these different areas, power, internet, traffic, social media, EMS? Can we get that and communicate in a bi-directional manner so that we can have better location-specific information to help us achieve that mission of a solid, well-executed election day? And as we started looking more long-term at that, we joined up with a relationship that we already have with Boise State University, with the College of Engineering, Department of Computer Science, and tasked them with helping us put this from prototype form into something that we'll be utilizing as we continue to go down line. I'm going to toss back and forth to some of the different folks here on our panel. But first, I want to talk about kind of getting ready to do that. One of the things that we had to do was really get in and do some preparation work. And for this, I'm going to reach out, Brett, if you're on board. Why don't you just quickly take us through the ME3PC2 process, or the different terms that are in there, and how that was kind of set up initially for us before we even went into Election Day.
Yeah, so my name is Brett Brandon. I'm head of cybersecurity with Idaho Secretary of State. I also am a traditional guardsman with Idaho's Air National Guard Cyber Operations Squadron. And when we look at the ME, we call it MECs PCs, or ME3 PC squared methodology. And it's the Air Force operational methodology for planning out most tactical operations when we're starting to looking at the acronym for mission, environment, the planning, and our contingencies involved. So we were able to take that same methodology and apply it to basic elections, looking at our environment, going across both the logical landscape and the physical landscape of Idaho. How are we going to overcome the different contingencies for communication? And those are the the planning methodology that we adopted and tried to instill using the technology that Chad has been mentioning.
Thanks, Brett. So that was kind of one of our first steps. We had to do the preparation work, and on screen you can see some of the different things we talk about, contingencies. One of our counties, for example, has a mobile trailer that if a precinct or polling location were to go down, gives them the ability to roll a mobile polling station into location. The center screenshot you see there is actually our war room on election day with different, we had our election system vendor, we had Office of Emergency Management there. You see Brett down at the far end, and Foster Cronin, who's with us today as well, is in the foreground of that photo. Second thing, as we continue to move on here, that we realized needed to be done is beyond just preparing, we also had to create a common operating picture. And that really meant having the intel that mattered, when and where it mattered. And to do that, we reached out to the Office of Emergency Management. Brad, are you on the line as well?
I am, Chad.
So go ahead and take it from there. Kind of give us the next steps when you and I met and you walked me down to your GIS officer there.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Chad. And it was a great opportunity for us. And it was great timing, actually, because if we think back, DHS had just put out a guidance on our 2020 or 2019 grant guidance. So election security was an investment that was required for us to take. We've made quite a few investments in GIS over the years, and trying to get all the information across the state and developing a picture that we can understand as well as make decisions from. So we had worked with PPE, we had worked with testing locations, we had done several COVID-19 dashboards to try to build awareness across the state at any given time so that leaders could take a look and see what's going on. So it made sense for us to kind of consider, what can we do for election security? We knew it was going to be, I should say, we anticipated there were going to be a lot of concerns and issues, a lot of false media reports and things like that across the state. So what could we do? We sat down and we started working through, okay, what about power? What if power goes out in the polling locations? What happens if weather events are an issue? What happens if there's a traffic related issue near polling locations? So those are all things we started building into the dashboard to be able to see. But in order for that to be good information, it was going to take a lot of people across the state to provide us, some input, to give us real-time data. We didn't get exactly everything we wanted, but we reached out to the emergency managers in every county and said, hey, here's the system we're putting together. Here's a survey that we'd like you to do. If you see any abnormalities or whatever, please let us know. We real-timed the power across the state. We real-timed the weather as well as the traffic concerns that we had all the information coming in from the fusion center as well as our DHS, PSA, and ISA. So those three entities were helping provide information. A couple good things that I think came out of this was we were also following the news media and feeds. We also had the ACLU, CSA, social media up and going. So anytime we saw something like, hey, I was just turned away at the polls, then there was information that could go to the team to say, hey, we need to come up with a justification why, or in this case, polls in your area haven't been opened yet. So that was one. We had a natural gas leak next to one. As soon as we plugged it in, located it on the map, we saw it was across the street from a polling location. We're able to contact the county clerk, let them know what's going on. They were unaware of the issue, but they could handle the situation. So, Chad, I know our timeline is very short, but I don't want to take any more time, but I think it was an extreme success. The only thing that I think we could do better as we go forward is have every polling location trained up on how to do a survey and let us know. So if there's a large crowd outside, we could maybe have law enforcement drive by a little more often and things like that. But all in all, I thought the way we worked together, it was a great team. Appreciate your all's leadership. And hopefully you enjoyed what we were able to provide at the table that day.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. And, to that note, that's a perfect segue. In fact, we did manage to get everything. And as Director Ritchie mentioned, we were able to actually get information to that county clerk, I believe about 9 minutes ahead, if my memory serves me correctly, 9 minutes ahead of when they found out from the power or from the gas company, and when they were actually notified by other agencies that incident was happening. And by then we were already involved in the conversation that was happening on the ground about how traffic was going to be rerouted and things of that nature. So getting that common operating picture. And then, as you mentioned, being able to move that forward and get it into the county. So this kind of comes to our third point here. One of the things that we learned from the military, and again, these are all kind of pulling away ideas from that military environment, drill and drill again. And that's one of the things that the military and that our emergency managers are so good at. So we started a relationship about 3 years ago. This is what drilling and drilling again looks like in the state of Idaho. These are all county clerks and election officials. Looping around the outside of the room that you see in black there, those are Boise State University computer science undergrad and graduate students. The red jacket that you see actually over on the far side here is one of the professors in the computer science department. That's Professor Hoda Marpuayan, and also part of our project here. And that takes us to Boise State University, who's now working with us on putting that next piece, that communication, two-way communication, back into the Edison system. Again, Edison simply standing for Election Day Intelligence and Situational Awareness Network. To talk to us a little bit more about both the relationship with Boise State and some of the things that we're looking at going forward, Professor Amit Jian. You with us there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Chad. I said we've had Chad and I had a working relationship for about 3 years now, and Hoda kind of came into it too. And she has a specialty in security, especially cyber physical security. And so that's how the relationship started. We did the tabletop exercises, and Chad was very impressed with what our students did. They took the Harvard stuff and extended it out. And since from there, we have created an Idaho Election Cybersecurity Center, Ensure. And it's doing several projects, but one of the projects is taking Edison to the next level and creating a mobile tool, and with all of the securities that goes with it. We've got 2 students, one undergrad and grad students, working on it. So I'm very excited about this developing relationship.
Thank you, Amit. And it's ironic, Ryan Macias was part of the battle staff team back when that was originally created, and we heard from him just a minute ago. Amit, I love the shirt you chose for today. That was one of the uniform pieces that goes clear back to one of the first Belfer Kennedy Center tabletop exercises that was done, I believe, back in 2018, and that's the one that we actually modeled in the image we had on screen just a little while ago. So to kind of wrap us up on the just the presentation side of it, we'll jump back in here and hit what may seem a little redundant on the conversation that Ryan was just sharing, but these are really kind of, as we get away to final thoughts here, super important things to be looking at. Leverage planning frameworks when you're doing your preparedness, whether it's military or whether it's the different tools that CISA has for you, but find a framework that you can leverage so that you're not trying to recreate the wheel. We were able to get in, use that framework, get our preparedness work done, and then have that so that we could communicate it with our partners as we went forward. The second thing is, it's really important. It's one of the things we learned in doing the November pilot test of this was just how much intelligence is actually out there, how much data can be utilized for situational awareness that we're just overlooking on a regular basis. It's out there, but we're not reaching out and tapping it to help us run elections better. And that's a situation that we don't want to see in Idaho anymore. And that's why we continue to push forward with this project. And then finally, in order to get proficient at anything, you have to practice to do it. it takes that preparedness, it takes that situational awareness, and it actually puts it into use when you do your training exercises, when you rehearse, and when you mock through some of those types of scenarios. So Foster, you're still with us, I believe, correct? Why don't you touch base on just one more kind of partnership that's here is the IRT project that we've got going with our military partners as well. Can you touch base on that for us real quick, and then we'll slide to questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chad. So we've been working for the last 2 years with the Air Force and Army Guard units at Gowan Field here in Boise. And what they've been doing is coming in on a training exercise that has been good for the military, but at the same time, they've been helping us with running or installing additional security around our elections systems, additional monitoring capabilities. And then this year we are in the process of completing a business continuity plan, and we'll be going through a tabletop exercise with the Secretary and his staff next week in response to an incident that the Guard unit is preparing for us that we're not going to be aware of until the day that we actually run it. So it's been an excellent opportunity for us, not only in the Secretary's staff, but I think it goes both ways with the military as well. So it's been a great opportunity, and I think every state, if you have these kind of resources available to you, you should take advantage of them. They're very smart, and they've been extremely helpful for us.
Thank you, Foster. With that, we'll go ahead and thank you, Lindsay, for the opportunity to present just the fast 60,000 foot. I'd love to kick over to questions if there are any. Specifically, Director Ritchie has to step off for another meeting here shortly. So if there's any questions for Director Brad Ritchie from Idaho Office of Emergency Management, I'd ask that we try and take those first.
Great, thank you. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but this is just a reminder. If you have any questions for the Idaho team, please either raise your hand or send me a message in the chat. Chad, I'll go ahead and start us off. I know we heard so much great feedback after that Battle Staff Boot Camp, and those who participated really got a lot out of it. And a lot of folks asked questions about that incident tracking tool that was used, you know, wanting to use something like that in their own state. And that's what you did in Idaho. So what recommendations do you have for other states? Is there somebody that they can reach out to in Idaho who can help other states who want to build that kind of dashboard themselves?
Certainly. Thanks, Lindsay. And that's a great question. And Amit can speak a little bit more to perhaps timeline, but that is exactly kind of the premise under which Boise State University and the Idaho Secretary of State were able to receive the notes that we have. We had a conversation before we ever left the event that day with Major Conley and asked what was the product roadmap for that. And there really wasn't one. Basically what it was left at is, I think if you want it, you can have it, was kind of how it played out. So we came back and we started putting the people together to try and do that. One of the reasons we're having to start over and kind of do it from scratch is our agreement with Boise State University is that as we do it, it will be open source. So in terms of having to recreate it or get started on their own, it might be actually more beneficial if they were to let us know of their interest so that they can help us from a testing standpoint. But I'll let Professor Gian talk a little bit about that. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so that tool was really something that was a one-time thing. It was basically written in a spreadsheet. It does have some nice features like the mapping stuff, but it's not designed at all where it can support multiple people using it. And so I think that's the whole thing. As Chad said, we're developing something that's, first of all, not Idaho specific. In fact, not even election specific. It's a event day situational awareness, right? So I think we've sketched up the interface. Chad's been very happy with that. We are doing the use cases right now. Then we'll start the development. I would say we would be ready for test partners probably within a year or less. It just depends on how fast those our students work on it. I would say probably 6 months, 9 months before we have beta versions out. Again, we don't want to develop something like, again, I'm not saying anything bad about that tool. but it was done for one time and you just can't use it in other places. And so that's fast, right? I can give you something tomorrow, but you'll never be able to maintain it. So what we're doing is talking about something more general that can last for a while and you can keep on evolving.
So I see the question in the chat, is there any relationship between the prototype tool and what Google had been working on to support D3P Belfer Center for the same purpose? I know there was originally a Google engineer and a Microsoft engineer, I believe, that were former Harvard D3P students, graduated, that came back to actually put that original tool together. They had shared their information with us. They had shared some of their repositories with us to kind of give us an idea to get started. But the new tool that we're operating from Boise State does not have a connection or a tie to Google, nor necessarily directly back to D3P Belfer, other than just from a subject matter expertise standpoint. So I hope that answers the question for you.
And I would say that tool was an inspiration, but we're not using anything from them. And as I said, there are some bad things about it, even though it was genius in terms of what it did at that moment. But it's inspiration and no direct connection.
Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, and we really heard the same thing from Belfer when we talked to them about the tool, that you know, they would love for it to be leveraged, but it really was created for that one-time exercise. And so it is really great to see that you all have taken this and run with it. And I know that we're going to hear from interested states because we heard from a lot of them right after that Battlestaff boot camp. So I will put my email address in the chat, in chat if you want to put the best email address for you all in the chat. If folks are interested in being a testing partner with Idaho with this tool, please reach out. I would be happy to connect you, or you can reach out directly to the team in Idaho. The timeline sounds great. I know folks would like to be able to use something like that in 2022. So, okay, yeah, I'll get back. Sounds
No,
great.
I think that's a great idea. You know, we're more than happy to work with NASS and to continue to keep everyone involved in whatever's happening. But if you guys don't mind coordinating that, we're more than happy. We wanted to do it along with all the work that we're doing at Boise State through the Ensure program there. It's all being done with the intent that when we get it past a beta phase, it goes to all the states. That's kind of the premise on which we set it up.
That's excellent news. Well, thank you, Team Idaho. We really appreciate you all sharing today. And again, if you have any questions for Idaho, I'm happy to connect folks after the webinar. I will have my email address in the chat in just 1 minute. So thank you, Chad and team. And with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce our next panel. We have Mr. Trevor Timmons, the Chief Information Officer for the Colorado Department of State, leading a panel from Colorado. So Trevor, you can take it away, and I will again let you introduce your panelists. Thanks.
Hey, thank you very much. Delighted to be here. Thank you, NASS. Thank you, Democracy Fund, for underwriting this. Great to share information. I'm reaching out, Chad, to you and to the professor and to your team. Fabulous work. Looks awesome in terms of just knitting together all those resources. I'm presenting on behalf of the state of Colorado. We also have Nate Blumenthal. He's with our elections division, and I'll let him speak for himself in terms of his background when he comes on board. And then we also have Mickey Trost, who's the Strategic Communications Director for our Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management within our State Department of Public Safety. And I see Mickey on screen. She's flashing her DHS-EM colors. I love that. So in Colorado, we've long had a really good relationship with other state agency partners. Between the governor's office, between state governor's agencies and the Secretary of State's office. And we've really had a true sense of shared mission amongst all those groups. We really started working much more closely with state emergency management resources really in 2016. We had already reached out to our state National Guard resources. They have a great cyber defenses unit. We engaged in exercises with them, cybersecurity oriented exercises. And then that really led us into some of those other areas under public safety within the emergency management space. In 2016, I remember we had several conversations with folks from the State Patrol in terms of their concerns about ballot security and security of voting locations. And so we stood up a phone bridge for us to share information across agency boundaries. And then we also had, we stood up a standing bridge so that if there were emergencies and we needed to reach out to other state agency partners, we had the contact information right at hand so we could engage with those folks. But honestly, in the run up to 2020, that collaboration, it just boomed to a whole new level. I mean, with the public health crisis that we were facing, emergency management was key in providing PPE and facilitating the distribution of that for primary elections early in 2020. And we used that to establish key contacts and those lines of communication so that we would know who to talk to within not only state homeland security, but state emergency management domains in case we had to reach out for things. And with the possibility of public unrest that we saw through the summer and leading up to November, we also solidified those communications with the state, the region, and the local law enforcement and emergency management resources. We saw this actually come to use within the election cycle. We had reports from local law enforcement of people that were surveilling voting locations, and they seemed a little suspicious. Some of this came reported up to us through the emergency management channels. Some of it came from local county clerks and their election judges. We were able to really rapidly get that information out, both to the local folks and to the law enforcement folks, so we could make sure and get eyes on and see if there was actually a real threat or if it actually turned out to be nothing. Because, you know, that fog of war, you know, especially in the heat of an election, can really lead to people, you know, getting nervous and maybe making poor decisions. But getting that information out very broadly to those folks that are involved, we think is just so key to have that situational awareness so people can understand kind of what they're up against. And then Mickey, who's going to speak a little later, she helped us stand up a standing call. We started, you know, a couple of times a week, and then 3 times a week, and then every single day in the 2 weeks leading up to elections, where we had all of the communications directors on the emergency management side on a standing noon phone call. It usually didn't take very long, usually was 15 or 20 minutes or so, but when we were engaging in our communications programs, and as they were hearing things bubble up from the local level, we were able to get that information shared very freely amongst emergency management, governor agencies, FBI, U.S. Attorney's Office, the State Attorney General, and in our organization. So we had that regular touch point to kind of share information and make sure we were all on the same page, and we all knew what was kind of going on and what initiatives different folks were kind of pushing in. I do want to single out Mickey. She's unbelievable within the state of Colorado. Her profile is so high, and she's got such a sterling reputation. Having her be so engaged and a member of that communications team was just, I mean, it was stellar. It was fabulous. And then we also had an internal team within our elections division that was focused on misinformation and disinformation and making sure that we were tied together with those local county resources to get good information in their hands and reach out to their communities. And actually, Nate Blumenthal leads that team in our office. And I'll go ahead and hand it over to Nate so he can talk about some of his experiences.
Sure. Hey, thanks, Trevor. And thanks for everyone for having us on today. I know a lot of you, but not all of you, I don't think. My name is Nate Blumenthal. I just came out here to Colorado mid last year to help stand up this election security team. I spent most of my career in DC. And I'll very briefly, because I know how long these Zoom meetings can get, walk through how we worked with our EMS folks and other non-election government entities in Colorado to combat the disinformation threat, right? So I think we heard from Idaho and Trevor on the cyber, but we knew last year from the FBI and from CISA that there was a significant disinformation threat as well. So we kind of started with the premise that we needed to make sure that Coloradans were aware of two things. They needed to be aware of the threat out there and what they might see on social media, and they needed to know to go to reliable, trusted sources, meaning county clerks or our office, essentially. And so we devised a social media campaign to get out these two messages. That was awesome. And our secretary has a pretty good Twitter following, but you know, there's like 5 million people in Colorado and she doesn't have that many. And just like lots of you, our budget is somewhat limited to say the least. So what did we do to get the campaign, get the word out broader? Well, we created something that we call the Amplification Network. We engaged over 40 NGOs across the political and economic spectrum, you know, so ranging from chambers of commerce to unions. And we also engaged all counties, including some county EMS entities, and a number of state level entities, including EMS at the state level. And what we, you know, asked them to do, and we all kind of came together, was that when we tweeted out something to get our message out to counter the disinformation, they would retweet or repost. It's that simple, right? So it just took a lot of organization, but it didn't cost anything. That ended up significantly expanding our reach. It depends on how you measure, but we think that this campaign, which was, you know, thrown together quickly and only ran about 2 months, reached about 3/4 people in Colorado for nothing. And so we are excited to continue and expand this moving forward to the midterms, and we wanted to give you all a quick heads up on that. The other kind of quick two things we did, and this ended up kind of reaching over into EMS, is that we undertook a very significant effort to ensure that most counties had the blue check marks on Facebook or Twitter, right, to be the trusted sources for people going there. And during our searching to see which counties were on, we had the check mark and did not. And talking to them, we ran across a number of regular old other county websites ranging from, I don't know, whatever it may be, to EMS and firefighter sites. And we, using our Facebook and Twitter contacts, engage these entities and help them get their blue check marks. So I think there's another non-election related but kind of quick thing we were able to help them with. And so, look, I think there's just a great opportunity for a range of election and non-election government folks, probably in each state, to really help amplify each other's word to get out accurate information. And we just want to take a very quick second to highlight that possibility for you.
All right. Are you ready for me?
Yeah, Mickey, over to you.
Sorry. I'll jump in. My name is Mickey Trost, and I've been the Strategic Communications Director for the Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management for 10 years. Spent 10 years as a fire PIO before that, and a proud Naval Postgraduate School graduate as well. I saw the logo on the last slide deck. So my role here really was to support that information sharing. But when you bring in DHSEM, we had 3 main missions to support our safe and secure election. And so the first was to activate the State Emergency Operations Center, which we do for all primary elections and for other election or inauguration activities. To activate the state's 24/7 Watch Center and Fusion Center. And then to specifically activate an election focused joint information center. So that state EOC was responsible for filling those resource orders that Trevor mentioned earlier. So we had 4 main resource orders, and that was going through all of the legal and appropriate processes to get the Colorado National Guard cyber support activated in supporting getting meals for everyone who was working in these different locations, very important piece. We also had the Colorado National Guard security staff on standby in case of any civil unrest, which we did not have to use. And then we were tasked with getting PPE out to all voting centers. And so we did that for about a month leading up to the election process. And then we also coordinate calls with all of our local stakeholders through the state EOC to get those emergency management or law enforcement updates through the state EOC to make sure that we aren't missing anything. And then within that state EOC process, that Fusion Center is activated. So they met daily. They had embedded Secretary of States. I believe Trevor was actually with them. We were very much remote, but I believe he was still embedded along with our Fusion Center folks. And then part of that is we also set up very specific email lists to our local jurisdictions, to our chiefs, to our sheriffs. We also used and coordinated through our threat liaison officer program for information sharing back and forth. And then we do have DHS staff embedded on a daily basis within the State Fusion Center that we used. The piece that we really added this year, so Trevor said that we've been building on this for several years, been doing exercises together and coordinating, but this year we really strengthened that Joint Information Center, which helped us with that misinformation, disinformation campaign. It also helped with Nate's campaign to make sure we got that information out, and really took advantage of the system we already had in place from years of working on these events. But due to COVID, we were already meeting weekly with every county PIO, whether they were public health, whatever level of government, type of government, state agencies, and our federal partners. So we already had them together. So we had a leadership group that was comprised of myself to organize. So use your emergency management PIO to be the manager organizer. I am not the subject matter expert. I can help with keeping us on timelines and on message and pulling together the right people. But the Secretary of State's office led the messaging. And so they were the lead for this event. I supported the Secretary of State's office. All of their communications staff attended our briefings that we had, that Trevor mentioned, were a couple times a week to daily. And we went through the full week of that election process. And then Trevor and Nate also attended our briefing so that we got those updates on anything that was happening that might impact our messaging. Along with those folks, we had every division PIO from the Colorado Department of Public Safety. We also had the Colorado National Guard PAO and the FBI PIO. So they attended all of our calls. We created a communications plan that we actually stuck to. We developed approved talking points that were used by all of us. And that really allowed us to immediately respond. So that if we had something going on, we could grab that talking point, get it out the door fast. We could get it across all of those different social media platforms so that we had a consistent message across hundreds of different accounts in the state of Colorado. So that consistency was really what helped us get that out, get it out timely. And our process was in place and we didn't have to track down people to get approvals. We really did rely heavily on Google Hangouts, and we did real-time communication with all of our state players really there. So we had one for the Fusion Center. I was a member of that along with, I believe Trevor was, and then we had a PIO one that we had Fusion Center and Trevor on as well. So we had liaisons across the different funnels of information coming in just to maintain that consistency and that real-time ability to attack whatever the problem was. And we have a great system in Colorado, so it was easy to support our Secretary of State's office. I'll turn it back over to you, Trevor.
Thank you very much. And I want to ask both of you if you've got some thoughts about kind of leveraging this going forward into the future, because I mean, what you should be sensing is that on the emergency management side, you know, they deal with fires, tornadoes, hurricanes, public unrest. I mean, they're dialed into those local emergency management folks and law enforcement. And, you know, they don't do elections all the time, but they can rely on us as subject matter experts to see how we can leverage some of their existing channels to actually improve things for the citizens and the residents of your state. And but in terms of this relationship and just information sharing, are there areas where you see this being leveraged into the future? Nate?
Sure, Trevor. Yeah, definitely. I think, and Mickey, hey, we haven't actually chatted about this, so I'm just gonna throw it out there, and if you disagree, please let me know. But I think one example of how at least we are hoping to move forward here in the next couple of months is regarding kind of the potential domestic violent extremist threat, the domestic terrorist threat. So the Director of National Intelligence released an assessment maybe a month ago at this point, which indicated that of the next year, individuals motivated by various grievances, but including the election results, claims of fraud, may conduct attacks or attempt attacks against government facilities. So they did not specifically indicate that these individuals would be attacking election personnel or infrastructure facilities. However, given those 2 points, we are concerned about that. And so, we are planning to actually put out a grant to our counties to help them improve their physical security. But we also plan to engage Mickey and other EMS folks on a range of different things, to include working with DHS to leverage some of their free physical security assessments for the counties. So I think that's one potential area that we, from our office, hope to coordinate more with EMS.
Right. And from the state side, anytime we can make those partnerships year round, it's a benefit. We don't know when we're going to be activated or when we're going to need each other. We support all hazards. It's if we get the systems in place and we find a good process to get that information sharing and partner support, it doesn't matter what hazard we're tackling. I'm using you for your subject matter expertise on what we should be talking about and specifics to look at, but then you've used my network or our ability to tackle information sharing, or the Fusion Center's ability to monitor open source platforms as effectively as they do. So, it really doesn't matter the hazard. The more we work together, the better we get at this.
Absolutely. And Mickey, one key point of that is you need to establish these relationships and know who those people are before you're in the middle of an incident, because the last thing you want to be doing is trying to figure out who the right person is when you're in the middle of the fire. If you establish those relationships and get those points of contact before you're in an emergency, you're all going to be a lot better off. And Lindsay, I'll go ahead and hand it back to you.
Thanks so much, Trevor and Mickey and Nate. We really appreciate the presentation, and I'll give it just a second for folks to ask questions if they have them. I think your presentation, your discussion really highlighted something that we at NASS heard a lot as we were preparing for this webinar, and it's that your state emergency management partners, they work on everything, every kind of emergency, and so for that reason they have so many connections across the state and down to the local level. And so they're really great at providing support themselves, but also for connecting you with other important players in the state. And it sounds like in Colorado, they were key in your connection with National Guard and others. So thank you for highlighting that. And we love to hear the promotion of election officials as trusted sources of information. And you will hear more about NASS's Trusted Info campaign, which is continuing in our next webinar. Oh, definitely in our third webinar and also in our second webinar of this series. So we're excited to talk more about that as well. So thank you, Colorado. I don't see any questions. But again, my email address is in the chat if you would like to connect with Colorado after this webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our last but not least panel of the day from North Carolina, which is going to be led by Ms. Karen Brinson Bell, who is the Executive Director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections and the State Chief Election Official for North Carolina. So you can go ahead and take it away, Karen. Thanks.
Thanks, Lindsay, and glad to be a part of this. I will introduce our three panelists and three very important folks to our processes, especially this past year. In just a moment, I'm going to do a few overview slides and hope that technology is my friend today. All right, looks like we're seeing the slides. So, you know, we titled our presentation, which I should put into slide mode, I'm realizing. Yeah. That we don't stop elections, we figure out how to proceed. And that actually came about when we did a tabletop exercise, not only with our emergency management partners, but all of our federal and state partners, and even local partners from county emergency management and county DIT. And the question that was posed to me from our state emergency management director was actually, when would we ever postpone an election or stop an election, stop voting? And it was bigger than just, you know, an incident at a single polling place. It was just an overall, you know, is there a time when there would be a hurricane or a circumstance? And, you know, my immediate response was, you know, we don't stop elections, we figure out how to proceed. And we've operated like that as election professionals for a very long time, but as we've built out the partnership with emergency management, which actually falls under our state Department of Public Safety, so law enforcement, National Guard, the fusion centers and other entities that are interconnected there, as well as working with our State Department of Information Technology. You know, it was really one of those moments where it changed the conversation, and we all started looking at our processes in that fashion. The partnership between the North Carolina State Board of Elections and North Carolina Emergency Management actually intertwines logistical support, emergency response, continuity of operations, and cyber and physical security threats to ensure the conduct of elections. This partnership and the statewide network have ensured continuity and continuation of elections through a hurricane, the distribution of more than 14 million items of PPE during the 2020 general election, and setting up joint operations at the State Emergency Response Operations Center the entire week of the 2020 election. So that's sort of an overview of us. I'll be joined today, and we're going to actually have me moderate some questions with the three panelists, which are Will Ray. He's the Chief of Staff for our State Emergency Management. Trina Parker-Velez is our State Deputy Elections Director, so my right-hand person, and then Stephen Vallant, who is our Business Continuity Manager and Consultant here at the State Board of Elections, and has a very diverse background in all of these areas. So we just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of how this partnership really spans a lot of areas. In many ways, I guess we're third because we can touch on battle staff and we can touch on sort of cybersecurity response, as well as other emergency responses. And so that's one of the key areas. Is we even look back to 2019, and we were conducting a special congressional election for 2 congressional seats in September of that year when Hurricane Dorian hit. And we activated emergency operations with our state partners. We had voting going on. It was not election day. It was actually during our early voting period. We deployed other counties to assist. We had major outages of internet and power and so forth. Yet working with our emergency management partners and others, we actually only shut down 1 polling place for election day and remained operational with some rescheduling of our early voting period. I show this picture because this is the island of Ocracoke, and while the normal polling place was flooded, it was our state emergency management and our National Guard personnel who made sure that while it may not look like a typical polling place, we were ready to go even through Hurricane Dorian. And then in October of 2019, it was with our partners that we launched our voter confidence campaign under the hashtag YourVoteCountsNC. And each partner spoke about their role in securing elections and the integrity and safety of elections, not even foreseeing that we would be dealing with a pandemic. So that was our focus, with cybersecurity and how to instill public trust. And so that was, as I've mentioned, DIT, Public Safety and Emergency Management, National Guard, and our Homeland Security and CISA partners. We did face, just as you did, a pandemic in 2020. And so we had a public health response. Interestingly, our state emergency management director is basically co-chair to our state public health director, health and human services director, in the effort towards coronavirus. So he briefs our citizens of North Carolina equally to her in a lot of ways about how we're responding. And it was the logistical support. We don't know that level of logistics. So we turned to emergency management, who was able to warehouse and distribute through our emergency management network in all 100 counties, the 14 million items of PPE, including the donation and receipt of the hand sanitizer that we received through NASS and NASS also. So that was quite an undertaking, and we could not have done it without emergency management. The coordinated response towards security meant that we not only worked with CISA and had trainings as part of our weekly, what we call huddles for our county election officials, but also our state officials. We did briefings leading up to the election and then throughout election day with our partners. There was constant monitoring, and Will can talk a little bit more about the system that we used for monitoring. And then we also dealt with incident support, both in the early part of 2020 and then around the 2020 general election. Some of our county government actually had ransomware attacks, and we shored up our response with all these partners to ensure that elections were not affected by those county government attacks. We do this in part through the creation of attack response kits that we call ARCs. We continue to build those out, and those are supplies that we can send out, to readily respond. And sometimes it's just a MiFi device and a few laptops that'll help get them through. But those are the kind of things that make up our ARCs and how we do a coordinated effort with our North Carolina National Guard Cybersecurity unit and our emergency response and management group. And then we also deployed our own battle staffs, very different in some ways from Idaho, but it is from the training that the Belfer Center provided. And we took that, did a modified version in March of 2020 for our Super Tuesday primary, but then really ramped it up for Election Day 2020. In part because of coronavirus, we chose to be at the Emergency Operations Center, but also because of the other threats and because it gave us a better battle staff environment to respond with our partners. And so that's actually a picture of us in the center with some of our heat maps and tracking information. This made us co-located because emergency management and National Guard work out of the Emergency Operations Center. We brought in our federal partners and stationed them there. It gave us a controlled incident response across all spectrums, utilities to cyber issues. And we developed a whole series of communication tools. Our tracker form was both electronic and hard copy. We prepared for even the Emergency Operations Center going down and not having power. We had a quick solve tally through our intake team, a Kanban board, a heat map, our workstation alert flags, just a simple flag, but that got everyone's attention for our runners. We did have a hotline for our counties to call into. We worked from a dashboard that communicated directly with our ongoing ticketing system, and we modified that to be used for Election Day. And then we developed a North Carolina playbook and actually game boards to help in the training and for everyone to have all the necessary information for points of contact across the state, not just within our state board staff or our partners. And this is a look at some of the diagrams that were used in our playbook. This is our incident tracking form, and we could do a printed version of this, our action officers and the different roles that people played. And they did wear different colors, outfits to designate themselves. So now I'm going to turn it over to ask some questions of our panelists. I'll stop sharing my screen for the moment, and then I'll put up our contact information. I'm going to start with Will and make sure Will's on. Are we able to hear him?
I'm here.
Great. Thanks, Will. So if you would, describe the partnership between North Carolina Emergency Management and the State Board of Elections and how that's evolved, and really the significance of the designation of critical infrastructure for elections and that development of the partnership.
Sure. Thanks, Karen. Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to be here and for your time this afternoon. I think piggybacking on some of the themes that you've already heard, especially from our partners in Colorado, our structure here in North Carolina is we see ourselves as an all hazards agency, whether that's the more traditional hurricanes or severe weather or other types of events that the EM community is more accustomed to responding to events like statewide civil disturbance, cyber attacks, or things like statewide elections. And so, as Karen mentioned, our division is within our Department of Public Safety, and our Secretary of Public Safety is dual-hatted as the State Homeland Security Advisor. And so he came in to office right around the time that DHS did officially update the critical infrastructure designation for elections as a piece of that infrastructure. Has taken his role as Homeland Security Advisor and that designation very, very seriously. And so actually a little bit different from some of the previous briefers, our engagement with the state board actually was more on a cybersecurity, physical security, and intelligence linkages early on. We're very fortunate to have some really solid federal partners in the state as well, from CISA and other agencies. And so we're really targeting some of the cyber assessments, not just for the state board, but also for some of our local boards and local county systems, as well as some of the physical security. And we actually had some targets for how many assessments were going to be done fast forwarding towards 2020. But that engagement really started in 16 or 17. The way our state is structured is we have our division is the lead coordinating agency for incidents across the state, but we have a lead technical agency. And so we really see our role, whether it's a pandemic with our Health and Human Services partners, or whether it's an election and our state board partners, that our goal is to free up that technical lead to do the work that they do to get through the incident and not worry about everything else. We really see our role as trying to support and come alongside, and not to have folks worry about how to get from A to B. Just know that we're going from A to B. We got you. And we'll do our best to try to get you there as quickly as possible. And so that engagement, again, really started on the more traditional cyber, physical security, and intel. And it has evolved, as you saw in some of the pictures that Karen showed. It's evolved to significantly more over the last several years. Obviously, similar to all of you, as in the run-up to the 2020 election, the emphasis on cyber and disinformation and the fusion through the intelligence community was a major part of what we did. But the lifting and shifting of the entire state board operation and the implementation of their continuity of operations plan to move from their offices downtown out to our Joint Force headquarters was a significant piece of 2020. But we've had everything from during natural disasters, making sure polling places have power or prioritized for restoration, distributing PPE, setting up tents, as you saw, for some of the temporary voting locations, to trying to work with our law enforcement partners and working to find some local poll officials that were for a period of time missing late one night during one of our statewide elections. And so while I think we saw our engagement as a very narrow focus originally, it has, and I think this speaks to Karen and her broader team, it has really evolved into truly an all hazards approach from elections as well. They're looking at everything from how do we keep our workers, our poll workers safe with PPE, to how do we make sure our systems are safe through cyber and physical security. So for about the last 2.5 years, two and a half years in the run up to the 2020 election, we've had a kind of joint agency, interagency task force that has been meeting monthly in preparation for kind of all of the things that we just listened. So I'll stop babbling there. Karen, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, you may have already touched on this the way you wanted to, but I'll see if you want to expand with this question of, is there any difference in supporting elections from other critical infrastructure?
Y'all are very enthusiastic, and we appreciate that. I think we have found that our elections partners in the state have been incredible, both at the state level and at the local level. These are, from our perspective, these are not, a couple years ago, these were not necessarily traditional partners that the EM community would have been closely linked with. And I think it's been a very, very seamless and easy partnership. And it was one where, we've seen an administration change, we've seen some leadership changes in our state in elections, and there was a continuity there, and a level of, I think, seriousness that Karen and her team kind of brought to the table and approached this preparedness perspective with, and I think has made it very, very easy for us to work with.
And then last but not least, I'm sure one of the things folks want to take away from this, before I switch over to Trina and Stephen, is there an aspect of the partnership that you think can be replicated by other states?
Yeah, so I think, again, some of what I think Idaho and Colorado have already hit as well. I think leveraging the strengths of each other of, we come at it from more of an incident coordination, incident management structure. We have the networks for distribution, whether it's physical, so like PPE, or whether it's information through the Fusion Center and law enforcement community or local public safety. And I think it's very easy, I think, for them. Karen can correct me if I misspeak, but I think it was easy for them to take their battle staff approach and overlay it into our State Emergency Operations Center. I think there's that natural linkage there to how we operate on a day-to-day basis, and how I think some of the methodology and tools and resources that have been pushed out through the elections channels, I think those link very, very well, and I think make all of our jobs easier when we're in the middle of the fight.
Thanks, Will. I'll ask you just to hold on in case Lindsay has questions for all of us, but I'll switch over to Trina. Trina Parker-Velez is the Deputy Director for the State Board of Elections. Are you on, Trina?
I am here.
Great.
Can you hear me?
I can, and I can see you now. So you were a county director for 25 years before you became Deputy Director for the state. What differences do you see in incident response between the county and the state, or even just over the course of the years that you've worked in elections?
That's a good question. Thank you, Karen. Well, I think all of us would attest to the fact that over the years before 2016 and before we became a critical infrastructure, the level of attention that was given to incident management, of course, cybersecurity, goes without saying, but just general incident management was not highly concentrated out there. I mean, counties are instructed to, make sure that the votes are counted, make sure that everything is accurate and fair, and know the law and conduct the election. But when it came down to, okay, how do we serve thousands and thousands of people during the same time period, doing the same things, with their county department structure, how do we respond to all of the many different crises and incidents that happen, and sometimes all at the same time? Counties pretty much have been left on their own to create their own tools, their own common sense ways of doing things, and trial and error. That has been my experience. Well, we certainly have along the way provided guidance in creating emergency plans when you have an earthquake or a bomb threat, those sorts of situations, but actually helping them to create a structure from which they can operate effectively for the good of the whole has been a little bit lacking. And so the partnerships that have been created since 2016 and since the designation of critical infrastructure has really changed the landscape for that particular situation. We all take it more seriously. We have included what we learned in the battle staff workshops in our conferences and tried to educate counties as to how they can follow that structure and that procedure. So that has been wonderful. Is there a lot to do? Certainly there is a lot to do. I'm hoping that as we conduct wellness checks in the coming year, we can sit down with our counties and talk to them about where they are, how we can help them in creating a good structure and a good battle staff of their own.
And we may wind up having to explain what wellness checks are, but I'll continue. But so, having gone to the workshop on battle staff, why did we feel the need to have a battle staff approach?
Well, first and foremost, obviously, we needed to support the counties. As someone mentioned earlier, there were the civil unrest. We had COVID that brought its own challenges, and we needed to be ready to support them in any way that we possibly could when they needed it at those pivotal times. We, after attending the D3P battle staff workshops, we also realized the importance of being able to recognize those trends, to have that situational awareness. We needed to know if there were lots of voters who weren't showing up on the books in the Western North Carolina counties. We needed to be able to see those trends so that we could react and we could affect those situations in a positive manner. The other reason we needed it was internally, quite honestly, with all that was going on, with as hard as everyone had worked, it was very important for us all to know on game day, if you will, exactly where to go, what to do, what you were responsible for, what you weren't responsible for, which is just as important, when to escalate matters, what information you needed, so that there was a confidence built in the team. They knew what they needed to do and they wanted to do it well. And the other need was to make sure that we took care of incidents that arose that did not need to be escalated, that did not need the top management's input or action on, or didn't need to go to the comms team. So it was a way to make sure that we were all confident, we knew what to do, and so that we could respond effectively, both internally and externally for the counties.
Thank you. I'm gonna go to a couple questions for Stephen, just to be mindful of time, and then if I need to, I'll come back for some more questions. Stephen, you've served in our nation's military, and you've been part of coordinated response and battle staff approaches outside of elections. Why is the approach effective for elections and working with supporting partners?
Great question, Karen. I'd say both the military and the elections business, they struggle with the same issues, which is shared situational awareness and timely informed decision making. So the battle staff approach that the Harvard Belfer Center streamlined, the takeoff from the military approach, took those lessons learned that the military has spent decades and years working on, and we were able to translate that for the election business. And so that allowed us to migrate from individuals taking an incident through its entire life cycle to a nice handoff process, like a good sports team, or like when you play baseball, you can throw the ball to one player and then to another. And so we were able to take care of those kinds of efficiencies and make election day more transparent and more of a process-oriented approach instead of all hands on deck, going after every issue together.
And you've actually been the one to complete sort of a lessons learned process and speak with each of the staff and some of our partners. So what have you gleaned from that? What really worked, and what do you foresee us working to improve upon as we continue with the battle staff approach?
Universally, all the respondees, except for a single person, so those are great odds, great statistics, like this approach better, and they found that it was transparent. It took the pressure off of their role. They felt like they could hand it off, pass the ball where it needed to go. They felt that if a certain team was overwhelmed, the battle staff approach allowed for an overflow of those incidents to flow into the broader battle staff. So it gave them that kind of surge relief. The routing of incidents to the appropriate players in a prescribed manner was something that was appreciated. The transparency of the process, we were inside the State Emergency Operations Response Center, so we were, in that big situation room, people could see the process working right there in the room and the adjoining rooms versus being spread out in our normal building. And there was a trust that was built on seeing all the piece parts work together. Things that we need to work on more is fundamentally just more rehearsal time, so that people are, election day is different from normal operations. So election day is a big bang. It's like going to the Super Bowl all of a sudden, and especially in 2020 with COVID and the unrest and everything, it was intimidating. We didn't know what to expect. So more rehearsals would be better. And then I think we've got time now to focus more on the sub-team specifics, so we can optimize their processes as part of the battle staff and integrate that into the larger approach that we accomplished.
Thank you. Lindsay, I have more questions, but I know we're running out of time, so I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Karen and Team North Carolina, for sharing today. And I don't see any questions in the chat or hands raised, but I did put my email address in there again, and please feel free to reach out to me if you are looking for any of these resources or you want to connect with anybody who presented today. I really appreciate everyone who participated. I think today's webinar really highlighted the resilience and innovation of election officials and how that's just amplified when they work with their state partners. And we saw how much state election officials have taken initiatives and ideas and run with them and made them better and made them their own, whether it's something from CISA or something from the Belfer Center. And I'm really glad that we have these kinds of opportunities through organizations like NASS and NASS and others to be able to have states share, so everybody doesn't have to reinvent the wheel and can reach out to each other and connect on many of these things. So thank you to everyone for joining today. Thank you to the Democracy Fund for their support, and we encourage all of you to join the next two webinars in the series. The next webinar, we will be highlighting media literacy education, and we will have the executive director from the National Association for Media Literacy Education, as well as Clint Watts, who is a renowned national expert on issues like countering disinformation and digital media literacy. And then and that one will be on Monday, May 17th, and you will receive the information through the email address you used to register for the spring webinar series. And then our third webinar is on Wednesday, June 9th, and that will be on communication strategies and promoting trusted election information. And we will talk more about our NASS Trusted Info campaign then. So thanks again to everyone. Take care, and I hope you all have a nice evening.